I want to get your thoughts on an interview I saw with Christiane Amanpour interviewing the Lebanese foreign minister. And in the middle of this interview, she's going to ask a question. He's going to start to answer it. She's going to stop him in the middle and say, wait. Do I understand what you're saying correctly? Did you just say this here? And he repeats it. And what he says here is, to me, was very, very illuminating and eye-opening on just how serious this situation is in the Middle East, and how Israel has not only no interest in peace, but they're physically, actively subverting it. Watch this.
Are you saying Hassan Nasrallah had agreed to a ceasefire just moments before he was assassinated?
He agreed, yes. We agreed completely. Lebanon agreed to ceasefire, but consulting with the Hezbollah, the speaker, Mr. Berry, consulted with Hezbollah, and we informed the Americans and the French that what happened. And they told us that Mr. Netanyahu also agreed on the statement that was issued by both presidents.
Okay, well, as you know, Mr. Netanyahu was also in New York at the time, and he actually said publicly the IDF must fight on. And then he ordered the assassination and the targeting of that headquarters, which killed Nasrallah. So, given all of that, I mean, who do you have any faith in if the strongest country in the world, the United States, seems to have no or very little influence after publicly saying that there would be a ceasefire?
I don't think we have an alternative. Yes.
That was just astounding to me, that we agreed that there would be a ceasefire, that apparently Netanyahu agreed, and that then again, apparently, according to this, what he said, what some others have reported, that Nasrallah went into his bunker to work with his commanders on working out the deals of the ceasefire, and then Netanyahu gave the order to take them out. And I want you to talk about two separate things here. Just one about the what was reported there at all, and then second, the last part of what he said about the trust issue. I'll come back to that in a second. Hit the first one there first.
This matches up with what we know, because when Netanyahu was coming to the United States last Thursday, the reports in the media were that the reports coming from the Americans were that they had worked with the Israelis for a ceasefire in Lebanon, and that they were working on the details. So that matches up very much with what the Lebanese prime minister is saying there, that Nasrallah had, and what you're reporting, Danny, that Nasrallah and his lieutenants were in the process of trying to come to a ceasefire deal. And then, of course, Netanyahu arrives in New York and says, no, that's not what we're going to do. And then, of course, the attacks occur. So there may have been a few hours of daylight there where Hezbollah would have realized there is no prospect of a ceasefire. Certainly doesn't forgive the Hezbollah for not remaining in not fully protecting themselves. Although I think the idea that somehow Israel was going to launch those types of strikes in Dahiyah and flatten residential buildings as Netanyahu is standing at the podium at the UN declaring his desire for peace, because that's how he began that speech. I think that is so fantastical, such an insane proposition, even though it lines up with how Israel actually is, that maybe that's why Hezbollah I wouldn't say they had their guard down. I don't think Nasrallah was sitting in his living room, watching a soccer match, eating pizza or something like that. But, certainly they would have been more dispersed. They would have probably cut their communications back quite a bit. They would have really gone to the ground and prepared for, they were already in a war mentality, but I think people understand what I'm saying. It would have been further than that if it was clear to them that there was no prospect of a ceasefire. And the problem is, as you're talking about, it's not the Israelis who are the villains in the story. It's the Americans who are the villains in the story, because the Americans are the ones who were telling the world, including the Lebanese and Hezbollah, that Israel has worked with this. We just got to get the details down, but Israel is in line with us for a ceasefire deal, which anyone paying attention to the last year should have known. This is just Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football, But, so I think that type of who the villain in the story is the United States. And if you see reporting from Politico on Monday, they had a big story talking about how Brett McGurk, who is the White House senior advisor for Middle East, and Amos Hochstein, who is a senior advisor for Israel and Palestine, basically have been walking around telling the Israelis, we want you to invade Lebanon. We're saying one thing over here publicly, but behind the scenes, supposedly McGurk and Hochstein are telling the Israelis, go do your invasion, go do your attacks. We're behind you on this. And there's an incredible quote in that story where it basically says that where McGurk and Hochstein are saying that an Israeli invasion of Lebanon, which would lead to the destruction of Hezbollah, would remake the Middle East for the better for years to come. This incredibly fantastical, delusional quote in there. But that, I think, adequately and accurately describes who these people are, who McGurk and Hochstein, Sullivan and Blinken, and ultimately Biden actually are. Yeah, that's the story. Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, and that, you know, that's what got my attention. It's just almost like a gut punch that you cannot be serious that you actually think that.
Right.
I mean, we've been talking like here for weeks about the possibility of Israel going in on the ground in Lebanon and how hard that of a military task that is. And now we're seeing it graphically play out after barely 36 hours into that. They're all of a sudden suffering huge casualties that even the Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, has admitted to, which surprised me. But now I wonder if Biden is getting any buyer's remorse from listening to these guys, because you're talking about making it for the better. Israel might not even survive this. What are you talking about? Remake the Middle East? That's just insane.
Right. And people thought Jared Kushner was mad when he was in charge of Middle East policy for the Trump administration. Right. You know, and this is just a different form of madness. This is just a different you know, and as you said, Israel has launched raids into Lebanon, and they've carried out their those raids resulted in a very ugly, bloody nose. Certainly not anything that you know, in terms of numbers that matters to the Israeli military, but in terms of optics, it certainly does. So Israel's been talking about going back into Lebanon for, as you said, weeks now. Certainly the history of Israel going into Lebanon, all that context. And the first combat between Israel and Hezbollah, certainly the optics make it look like Israel lost. I mean, they lost 8 young men. You can't, my heart breaks for those young men, for their families, because what did they die for? Those young men should have lived lives, could have done literally almost anything else in their life than that, right? And so my heart breaks for those young men who died there. Because it's just so worthless and ultimately serving what purposes. But you know, the thing about it though is the video that comes out of it, the first video of Israel's combat operations on the ground in Lebanon, the first video, Danny, are their kids carrying other kids on stretchers to medevac them out. Right. And in a second video of the ground combat operations are those medevac helicopters landing at hospitals. So that's what the Israeli public gets the day after having taken all those ballistic missile strikes. And anyone with a brain in Israel knows that those strikes were they hit their targets. Whether or not they caused any damage, who knows? We'll ever know. You got to assume on the Israeli air bases, those aircraft were up in the air, or they were in their hardened bunker. Certainly all the troops would have been bunkers themselves. They had hours to prepare for this, so likely there won't be those types of casualties. But the fact that they hit them, and again, back to what we said before, that was a limited strike by Iran. What happens when they bring in their allies and they launch a real strike? You know, as well as too, any Israel really watching this is just like, well, you know what? That could have been my apartment building. That could have been my house. That could have been my kid's school. We are not protected here. And then the next day, the video, as well as they had a terrorist shooting at a bus stop, right, in Jaffa, right? I mean, and then the missile strikes, and then now, hey, our boys went into Lebanon, and what's the video coming out of that? Them getting carried out in stretchers, you know? So it's, but, you know, this is Israel is a nation that was founded in war, founded in violence, and I think, unfortunately, until there's a generational change, that is the only reality that Israel will know is war and violence.
Yeah, and sometimes that can cure you of that when things go sideways, but we'll have to wait and see. Listen, really appreciate you coming on today, Matt. It's always a pleasure to have you weigh in on these things and giving our deep dive audience the truth and the bottom line. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Danny.
And we appreciate you guys too. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already done so, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.